Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Collision. Daniel here. And hey, it's been a couple months since we had a last MCU Marvel movie, which means it's probably time for another one. Everyone's favorite space Viking, Thor, is traveling across the Bifrost back into movie theaters with Thor: Love and Thunder. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So Thor, he's back. He's been like in the Avengers and some of like the team ones, but this is his fourth kind of solo entry movie, and he's undergone some changes over the years, some more serious to kind of more comedic, and just some of the tone. And even just his characterization, the God of Thunder is not the mighty Avenger that maybe he once was. This movie finds him kind of soul-searching, trying to rediscover his purpose, kind of how he fits into things, what his role is. Which the same cannot be said about this movie. This Thor: Love and Thunder is definitely a movie that has a clear identity. It knows exactly what kind of film it's trying to be. Whether that identity is pleasant and enjoyable, or annoying, or not good, is up for discussion. But this film definitely knows what it wants to be, and I do think a lot of like the enjoyment of this movie for you is really going to hinge almost entirely on what you think of Taika Waititi's kind of storytelling sensibilities. Personally, I enjoyed his in Thor Ragnarok, the last Thor movie, where he kind of introduced some of his more kind of zany humor and a lot of bright colors, and kind of made it more in line with like the Guardians of the Galaxy James Gunn-esque vibe, rather than the more kind of serious tone of the first Thor movies. And this one definitely, sort of what started with Thor Ragnarok has just been cranked up to 11, probably breaking the dial off the thing. This is very much a Taika Waititi movie, I think, for better or worse. And I think at times it definitely works. This is a legitimately funny movie. There are some hilarious laugh out loud moments, featuring the goats, the sort of magical big goats, which are hilarious. And it's kind of an ongoing gag where Thor's kind of newer acts is like almost like an animated thing, and like jealous of his relationship with his old hammer. And so there's definitely humor to be had, and people in our theater were laughing quite a bit. But definitely, even more than with Ragnarok, Waititi he goes for the joke every single time. There is not a single lost moment to throw a gag into this movie. And at least for me, that although some of those really do land and are funny and make you laugh, it's just sort of this unrelenting string of kind of barrage of just sort of here's a joke, almost like the way my wife put it after the theaters. This movie desperately wants to be funny. It wants to be entertaining. Sometimes it works, but at least to me, sometimes it sort of feels like almost like a series, a collection of like Saturday Night Live sketches, or it's just sort of here's these funny moments, and sort of like the story just seems sort of in service of the jokes, rather than just sort of being organically humorous based on the narrative. So again, I think a lot of it will depend on what you expect going into this thing, but at least for me, the humor was a little much. And probably the center of that, Chris Hemsworth, he's as kind of charismatic and chiseled as he's ever been as the God of Thunder, Thor. But his character kind of suffers a bit from sort of the Taika Waititi treatment, where he sort of the comedic element of his character has been stretched kind of so far to the point that he's just sort of this bumbling buffoon that he's sort of an idiot, kind of throughout the movie, and he just in a very like cartoonish sense, where it doesn't even feel like necessarily a real believable character. And I do think, although Hemsworth's a good actor and he does do some more serious stuff, I do think sort of the way that they've characterized him as sort of this buffoon does kind of undercut a bit of sort of those more serious moments. But hey, Hemsworth's not the only Thor this time in this movie. A lot of the buzz about this movie has focused on Natalie Portman, kind of her surprising return to the franchise, not just as Jane Foster, but as another Thor. So I think a lot of people are curious to see how they kind of pulled this off. I think the mechanics of how they pull it off are clumsy. The less you think about some of the implications, probably the better. But kind of other than that, she's fine. She adds a lot, kind of a unique dynamic to the movie. Actually, a lot of the heart, a lot of like the more heartfelt kind of emotional moments come from her character, and almost ironically from her as Jane Foster rather than as her like Thor character. So she's fine. But definitely, I think the standout in this movie It's definitely Christian Bale as the villainous Gore, the God Butcher. But he's great. His character is played in a very strong horror tone, kind of a horror vibe. I think even more terrifying and like horror-ish than anything in like the Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which was a very horror-inspired thing. He's not, and I think because of that, it gives a very kind of stark contrast to the more like bubblegum bright aesthetic of the rest of the movie, and because he's very dark and kind of plays it very straight and serious, and he's used sparingly, but as we'll get into in just a second, I think some of his like motivations and like sort of what's driving his character are probably some of the most interesting, maybe ever in an MCU movie, at least since Thanos. I definitely enjoyed him in this movie. As far as content to consider in this thing, profanities, kind of, I guess, a standard of what you expect at this point from an MCU movie. There is a fair amount of kind of mild profanities, most beginning with the letter S, which is used really frequently all throughout. Violence. Typical Marvel violence again, it's not changing things up too much. Not as violent as the Doctor Strange movie, and almost all the violence, maybe all of the violence, is directed towards like inhuman creatures, these sort of shadow monsters that get dismembered and kind of cut in half, and they're sort of like creature gore and blood. But again, nothing really towards like human characters. Sexuality, this is where there's as far as content, this is definitely where there's the most. As you've sort of maybe seen in the trailers, Thor is shown bare butt naked, at least briefly in one scene. There's also kind of a repeated extended gag about an orgy. They're sort of in like this pantheon of all the deities, and Zeus is there and talks about how they need to schedule their orgy, and later he's gonna hey, if you don't listen to me, you're gonna get uninvited to the orgy, and they drag it on, and again it's just not a funny. It's not a funny joke. It is a little inappropriate, even if it is consistent with like the Greek mythology. Another character, a non-human kind of species creature, kind of shares at several moments about their sort of his kind's like mating rituals, which happens between two male characters. He talks about his two dads at the end of the film. You don't see the actual like mating ritual, but you see him and another male version of his species that are going to go through that ritual. So there's that. And then Valkyrie, played by Tessa Thompson. Again, she's been like in some of the interviews and stuff talking very strongly about like the bisexuality of her character and how important that is. It's not really stated in the movie, but it's very clearly apparent that she is a bisexual character. She's sort of lusting after Thor, but also showing interest in some of the female characters, and kind of flirtatiously like kisses the hand of another female character. So there's definitely some kind of sexuality kind of all throughout sprinkled in this film. As far as like stuff going on beneath the surface, it's kind of interesting. Although it's overall like kind of a more fluffy, lightweight kind of comedy movie, that actually presents some kind of interesting, more meaty themes and concepts to get into. And kind of at the core of this movie is really like an exploration of the classical problem of evil, which, if you're not a philosophy person, sort of the classical objection that, hey, if God exists, if he's all loving, if he's all powerful, then why is there so much evil and pain in this world? And it's sort of explored through the character Christian Bale's Gore, the God Butcher. He's like introduced as a very religious, kind of pious character, and he's in a hard place, and he's kind of praying for the gods to have mercy and help his kind of save the life of his daughter, which they don't, and his daughter passes away, and it turns him into a very kind of broken man that's just angry at the gods, kind of disillusioned with their the benevolence of them, and just sort of on this sort of crusade to eliminate the gods and kind of against kind of anti-religion. And kind of throughout the film, he's at several times he's kind of contrasted with Jane Foster's character, who's all both characters are kind of grieving for different reasons and dealing with pain and their circumstances and kind of wrestling with what do they do. And, and Jane is very much like a woman of science, but whereas kind of Gore is pushed away kind of against religion and the gods, Jane is drawn to religion and to finding kind of hope and meaning through religion. So the film definitely presents kind of two very polarized, completely different perspectives, kind of different responses on sort of the pain. And as is to be expected, a deep, nuanced, kind of philosophical problem like this, a comic book movie, especially one like Thor: Love and Thunder, isn't necessarily gonna, it's not nuanced enough to really unpack that, and it definitely doesn't give answers in a very clear, like biblical or Christian sense. But it does kind of throughout kind of unpack that, that some of the pain and stuff actually is what makes us human, and sort of some of these expectations that, the gods would just sort of remove all pain, that kind of in doing so, you sort of lose what it means to be human. So there's definitely some stuff there for Christians to kind of wrestle with or work through. Maybe the other theme going on in this is just religion. Thor obviously is a character from Norse mythology, so religion has always kind of somewhat been an aspect of these movies, but really never more central to the story than it is here in Love and Thunder. And I think this is going to be maybe controversial. I hope it's not too controversial, but it's definitely sort of what they do with the religion. There's different ways Christians can approach this. I think kind of depending on what you expect or how you kind of work through it or apply it. Some people will be turned off by this and maybe offended by it. Other Christians, I think, can kind of maybe work through it in more of a positive sense. And again, at no point does this film present religion in like a biblical Christian way, nor I think should anyone expect a movie Thor: Love and Thunder to do that. But it presents a world where like kind of all the classical gods and religions are true. You have Zeus and kind of the Greek and Roman gods, and then a bunch of weird, bizarre, kind of made up artificial gods. And overall, it presents a very negative tone towards these gods. They're all these sort of petty, self-serving, kind of egomaniac characters. So in some sense, it's sort of like an anti-religious thing. But I think maybe on the other hand, maybe more where I come at this film is that the characterization is kind of the unfavorable one. It's consistent. Zeus and those gods, they were petty. They were egomaniacs, if you've read some of the Greek mythology. So in that sense, it is accurate to kind of who these gods are. And really the way that they present these gods, they're really not gods in like a divine kind of biblical sense. They're really just superpowered individuals. They are kind of more earthly in that sense. And the film doesn't really conflate like that kind of the fictional gods with the real God. Like Jesus isn't like at this assembly of all the gods and stuff. It does leave the door open that there is like a higher kind of divinity that is sort of beyond just these more superpowered kind of controlling petty gods. So I don't know if the film necessarily is like anti-religious as much as it is this sort of criticizing false gods, some of these false kind of mythological creatures. So I do think Christians can, again, I think some might be turned off by the way it sort of deals with religion, but I do think there is value in just sort of kind of understanding the nature of like the one true God in contrast to sort of these this more kind of petty, unsatisfying deities and stuff as presented in the movie. So I think in the end, in a lot of ways, although it's completely different in tone, a completely different movie, to me, there's a lot of similarities to the most recent Doctor Strange movie, where it is sort of a unique tone, vibe. It does have a clear identity. I just don't think it does enough to elevate it beyond like this is the very bottom tier of the MCU movies. It's not a great movie, although it does have a few, I think, maybe great moments scattered through in there. There is some like moments of kind of creative brilliance, like the cinematography and in the shadow realm and stuff is really cool. But at least to me, like some of the identity and the vibe that felt really fresh in like 2017, like with the last Thor movie, of just sort of the offbeat humor and like the action that synced to these nostalgic rock songs and stuff. I just think, for me, I think that sort of whole trend is getting tired. There's been so many films like that now that it just sort of loses some of that enjoyment. And at least for me, it just sort of felt like a noisy film that left me feeling more drained by the end than energized. But hey, let me know. I know this is a film that a lot of people are going to see. People love the MCU. People love the Thor characters. I'd love to have a conversation with you guys if you felt the same way I did about this movie. If you enjoyed it a lot more than I did, or maybe some of your thoughts on like the way it deals with religion or the problem of pain or any of that stuff. Love to have a conversation with you about that. If you haven't done so, encourage you subscribe to our channel, like this video, join with what we're doing here at the Collision. Got a lot of reviews and other fun stuff going on that we'd love to have you be a part of. But thanks for watching, guys. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.